Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and thanks for joining me for today's episode. And guys, today we're going to talk about jigs some more, and when you do not want to throw a jig. When a jig is not a lure that you want to pick up, when there's other baits that work better. This is a topic I've never heard anyone talk about before, but I think by listening to it, it's going to help you guys get some more good fish over the course of the next year here. And also, guys, speaking of jigs, I'd like to invite you to please swing by Tackle Warehouse and check out my Blaukat Throwback Power Finesse jig. One of my favorite jigs in the winter time of the year to use. We got 6 different colors and 3 different sizes. So I'll link that in the description there. And also, guys, I will put my Fish of the Moment lake map breakdown in the description of this video. We got our winter maps on right now. These are maps that will give you GPS waypoints. You can go right to some good winter fishing places on your favorite lake, start catching fish. So I'll have that linked in the description there. Really appreciate that. Okay, jigs, guys. When do you not want to throw a jig? When are they not going to work? When do you want to throw something else? Number one is they always work. They're never not going to work. A jig is one of the few baits out there, and there's not many of them. There's not many baits that can say this, guys, but a jig is one of the few baits out there that you can go to any lake or river or pond in the country that has a bass in it, 12 months out of the year. I don't care if the water visibility is 4 inches or 40 foot in clarity, and you can catch bass on a jig. It's probably the most consistent, versatile bass fishing lure that there is and ever will be, without a doubt. If you don't fish jigs, you probably don't understand that fully, but there's a lot of different applications that make those work in different scenarios, like your colors and your size and your weight and your profile. So not all jigs are the same there. But let's talk a little bit about when a jig may not be the best lure that you want to throw. A jig is always going to be a lure that catches larger fish. So if you're in a situation where the fishing is really, really tough, and maybe the fish overall, you got a lot of small fish in the lake that you're fishing, or maybe they've gotten conditioned to a jig, maybe you've been fishing a jig a lot, under this situation, sometimes there's a lure that will be more productive. So let's go with this scenario here. Let's say, for example, you're fishing a tough body of water where there's not a lot of good fish in it. Maybe 3-pounder a big fish or something like that. And then you have a tough day. Let's say it's bright and sunny out. The water's maybe, clear water, or maybe, super bright bluebird day, just tough fishing conditions, a north wind. Situation like that, a bulkier jig, since a jig is a bulkier lure like a jig may not be as productive as something more downsized. So you may have to go to like a shaky head or a Ned rig and start catching more fish. But once you know that the fish are biting the jig, in other words, the personality of the fish are on a jig where they're not chasing and they're actually on the bottom, they're relating to the bottom, they don't want to move far off the bottom, they're just taking advantage of something hopping along the bottom. If a bass is going down on a jig like that and he sees this jig, or maybe even a little bit larger one, like a larger profile jig, you got this bass that is maybe not super aggressive, maybe not super hungry, maybe it's not a very big bass, maybe it's a 1.5 pound or 2 pound bass, bright bluebird conditions, not much wind, maybe a lot of fishing pressure. Another thing with that, a lot of activity on the lake. They're going to go down on that jig and they're going to look at it and they go, "Oh, man, that's just a little too much for me. That's too big of a commitment for me to want to suck that big jig in." That's when, if you have something like a little finesse worm or a little Ned rig or a little tube, something downsized, it can be better than a jig under a situation like that. With the exception is if you have cover or not have cover. If you don't have much cover, let's say, for example, you're fishing a clean point and you have a deal like that. A lot of times a jig may not be the best bait. You can catch them on a more downsized lure, but let's say, for example, you pull up on let me throw this scenario out there. You pull up on this point, this clean, gravelly, flat point, not much cover on it. And you throw your jig out there and nothing, but you pick up a little Ned rig and you catch 2 or 3 on it. Then you go around the corner and let's say, for example, there's a boat dock back there. And underneath this boat dock, you go back in there and underneath the walkway, there's somebody put a brush pile underneath the walkway of this boat dock and there's some shade on it. In a situation like that, you pitch that jig in there and that jig is going to be the best lure. the little Ned rig's not going to be the bait you want to throw in there. A situation like that calls for a jig. Anytime that you're around cover, a jig is always better. So another thing that you can sort of, go by is if you're fishing a lake that doesn't have a lot of cover and it's pretty clean, a jig may not be the best bait. You can still catch them on it occasionally, but there may be another bait that catches them better. A jig is an excellent lure to fish around cover, whatever cover it is. It could be a lily pad, grass bed, reeds, boat docks, lay down trees, boulders in the water, whatever. But bass need to have some type of cover for a jig to be the best, and a little bit more finessey presentation works better on a clean area. So anyway, guys, hope that helps you catch some more for you, and we'll talk later.